Welcome back. We're looking at Afghanistan's state of political limbo as it waits for the final results of the elections last month. Will the results really make that much difference? Discussing this issue is Tamim Ansari, an Afghan-American commentator who joins us from San Francisco. He's author of the best-selling book, Destiny Disrupted, A History of the World Through Islamic Eyes. From Stanford University in California, we have Dr. Robert Cruz, an assistant professor of history and co-author of The Taliban and the Crisis of Afghanistan. And here in Washington, D.C. is Halima Karzai, an Afghan-American activist for the rights of women in the Muslim world, who was previously director for foreign policy at the Independent Women's Forum. And Halima Karzai, I'd like to come back to you on this issue of President Karzai's image. In terms of how his image did take a battering in the later stages of his office, how do the Afghan people regard that?
Well, the question is more so of the people who are inside of the government. And we have to remember that the question of the warlords who are there, these were warlords and people within the government who were supported by elements within the international community. And that in itself has made the Afghan government fall from out of grace within the Afghan people's eyes. So from that perspective, we have to really assess why do Afghans feel the way that they do, and what should we do to make sure that their voices are actually heard more so than that of the international community.
How would you expect, if Hamid Karzai is confirmed for another term, how would you expect his next term in presidency to be different? What would he do differently?
Well, we can be hopeful that there will definitely be more change. I mean, Afghanistan has been a war-torn nation. It's been 30 years of war. So 8 years we have seen progress. We can be hopeful that there will be more change and more progress. And the change and progress that we really must see is that the Afghans and the Afghan security forces are given the opportunity to defend their own country.
Tamim Ansari, how would you expect life for the average Afghan to change if things have gone downhill, as you said at the beginning of the show, in terms of where this election has taken the Afghan people? How do you expect life to change for the average person there?
Well, when I say things have gone downhill because of this election, what I mean is that in the first election, the question up for grabs was not really who was going to rule the country, but whether elections was a good thing. And I think the Afghans overwhelmingly came out, 70% registration. They said, yes, we want to settle things with voting. The premise of voting is that if a government fails, the people can turn it out. And I think that the Afghans seem to feel pretty resoundingly that Karzai government has failed. So in this election, if Karzai had run a straightforward campaign and run on his record and lost, he could have done a great service for his country and done a great thing for the credibility of elections in Afghan society. Now it looks like he's going to win, and I think that the changes that are going to come about have perhaps more to do with how McChrystal and McKiernan and the U.S. policy is going to function in Afghanistan, not so much what Karzai is going to do. Because although he failed, I don't think you can put the blame on that so much on Karzai. You know, he came into an incredibly difficult situation, and I don't know who could have done better. But the fact is he did fail, and if elections were to have some credibility, he would be gone and someone else would have a chance to try.
Now, Dr. Cruz, this issue of having more troops and the push for an equivalent to a surge in Afghanistan, I guess a lot of people don't realize there are probably more contractors working in Afghanistan now than troops. Can the average Afghan tell the difference between the two, and how would the image be regarded of these people, considering again the sort of misconduct that's been connected to the independent contractors?
Well, I think the new doctrine to be announced by McChrystal, and I've seen a bit of the guidelines that are meant to go out to U.S. soldiers in the field, they announced actually a very radical shift, which is aimed at combating this very negative image, most recently displayed by the U.S. embassy guards in Kabul, now which you've probably seen. But the new policy is meant to focus on persuading rather than coercing the Afghan population. But the problem here, as McChrystal recognizes, is that the success of U.S. and ISAF forces depend entirely upon the legitimacy of the Karzai government. And this election has really dealt, I think, a fatal blow to the legitimacy of the Karzai government. So though Washington may send more troops, in the end they will be fighting on behalf of a government that is illegitimate in the eyes of more and more Afghans. And this will only strengthen the case of the varied insurgent movements in the country and really, unfortunately, promise more violence potentially.
Of course, Dr. Cruz, we have an American public that's rather weary, war-weary, with the experience of Iraq and, of course, the prospect of a longer campaign in Afghanistan. Now, I wonder, I mean, a lot of people are asking here, well, if US and the NATO just pulled out altogether, what would happen to Afghanistan? What, in your opinion, what would happen?
Well, I think there would be, I mean, it's already, the country's in a state of civil war. I think the civil war would deepen and take on new forms. On the other hand, I do think that in terms of the military surge that is being proposed, in order for it to work, there has to be a new political framework, which would involve a host of political efforts, both diplomatic in terms of international relations, but also within the country. I think the best the United States could do to hope to leave the country would be to push Afghans to reconcile, perhaps to revisit the Constitution, to create a new kind of decentralized government. This is one of Dr. Abdullah's platforms. But in its current state, clearly there's no single military outcome that will solve this problem. So there needs to be an equivalent surge in diplomacy, a revisiting of the constitutional issues. And one thing the Americans can do very pragmatically very soon is close Guantanamo, close the bases in Afghanistan, which are, like the contractors, very unpopular in the country. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of concrete steps that could be done beyond the military sphere to try to push Afghans to reconcile and potentially to pave the ground for a new, broader Afghan government that would allow American and ISAF forces to leave the country.
Halima Karzai, you know, we had a comment from a viewer through our Facebook page, if I could put this to you. Ibrahim Nasser wrote in saying, if NATO leaves Afghanistan today, nothing will stop it from splitting along ethnic lines, and that will divide Pakistan. It is in the interest of Pakistan and Afghanistan that NATO stays till the country gets viable. But that also means that Pakistan must stop interfering in Afghanistan as well. What do you see the impact of, the elections on Pakistan, and what role Pakistan might have to play in stabilizing Afghanistan now?
Well, I'm sure that Afghans want nothing more than to be self-sufficient and not at the mercy of the international forces in Afghanistan. So we have to make sure that Afghanistan has a modern security force in order to defend itself. And if the international community decides at that time that they would like to leave, then as long as Afghanistan has the capacity to defend itself, which is fine. But at the same time, if they want to leave Afghanistan now in the state which it currently is, we can't forget what happened to Afghanistan, and as a result, September 11th, when Afghanistan was abandoned 30 years ago. You know, especially at leaving Afghanistan at the hands of its neighbors. We cannot have that happen again.
Tamim Ansari, there's a question that came in also for a comment through Facebook from Anas Malik, who wrote in saying, I think the US has plundered the world enough. It is time for the US to hibernate and tend to its own financial mess. Do you think America's popularity has taken a battering in general because of the situation in Afghanistan and its involvement in it?
Well, the American reputation in Afghanistan certainly has taken a battering. It's an amazing thing that America now finds itself in much the same situation in Afghanistan that the Soviets found themselves in during the 80s. So that's a terrible thing. At the same time, you know, if America were actually to just withdraw from Afghanistan, I think there would be catastrophic results in Afghanistan. Not just because the country would split along ethnic lines, but I think that as the withdrawal began, a lot of people would be making calculations about how to survive the coming chaos, and they'd want to get on whatever they calculated would be the winning side. And so if they began to think that Karzai was going to fall, that the American and international community was going to not be in Afghanistan anymore, there'd be a rush over to the side of whoever these insurgents are. And then chaos in Afghanistan, I think, does have really serious bad consequences all around the world, and for America too. So I don't think America can simply withdraw and disengage.
Pakistan on the line. Mohammed's with us. Mohammed, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, my question is that actually, you know, democracy is some sort of luxury which can be practiced after having some sort of proper literacy and proper prosperity and the awareness. But my question is that to all of these people, that why the Americans are imposing their democratic agenda and demanding us to kill our brothers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Somalia. Why
Okay.
they are doing like they are eating up their resources?
Okay, Mohammed, because we have so little time, let me put this to Dr. Robert Cruz. This issue comes up regularly of America imposing its style of democracy. Is there perhaps a flawed model that's being applied to Pakistan here by the West, to Afghanistan by the West, that might not actually fit?
I actually think that the bigger question is Washington's commitment to democracy in Afghanistan. I think if we look back to the original post-Taliban government, this was cobbled together in Germany. From internal accounts, we know that it was in fact Iran that brought up the issue of democracy in the new Afghanistan. Washington wanted a kind of strongman in Hamid Karzai, but it was Iran that brought up the democracy issue. And if one looks at the attention paid by Washington to constructing democratic institutions and not just relying on personalities, I think we'd have to give Washington a very poor grade. So in this case, if anything, it's been a very weak effort to impose democratic rule there.
Well, so yeah, we have to stop there. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to carry on, though there are a lot more questions. I want to thank you all for taking part in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us too. Don't forget, you can catch previous shows on podcast. Just log into itunes.com. This week's podcast features my conversation on American strategy change in Afghanistan with the former US Marine Corps General and CENTCOM Commander Tony Zinni. That's it from me and the team. We'll see you next time.